Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading the charge. Shipping lives at an intersection between the ship and the shore, between regulation and operations, between innovation and execution. Very few people have actually worked on all three sides of that equation. Today's guest has that experience. We are delighted to have Captain Ankur Arora, global market leader, commercial at Bureau Veritas Group. Captain Ankur spent years at sea, moved into senior shoreside roles with ship owners, and now operates inside one of the premier class societies. That journey gives him a grounded, practical lens on what's changing in our industry and what still hasn't. In this conversation, we'll talk about what life inside a class society really looks like, how technology shows up when it's no longer theoretical, and where experience still matters most as shipping evolves. Captain Arora, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was a great introduction. I really appreciate this opportunity. I've been looking forward to this for months. We met almost, 9 months back. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate that.
A little background for everybody. Captain and I met at a conference, heard him speak. It was great. And then I started thinking, we haven't had anybody from class on. And I thought, let's get somebody who's got some this practical experience. Talk about that experience. Talk about your seafaring background and kind of how you got into the industry. How did you get into a life at sea? Was this something that was from your family, friends? Did you stumble on it like I did? How'd you get into this industry and particularly seafaring?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So, no, Chris, I don't come from a shipping family, but I do come from a city in India called Dehradun, which is literally a factory for merchant navy officers. It's about 8,000 merchant officers coming from the same city, which is a very big number. So I had seen the atmosphere around this profession during my childhood days. Honestly, there's a practical side to it. Shipping is one of those professions where money and independence comes quite early. And that was one of the biggest attractions for me when I was young. Financial freedom, global exposure. That's a great combination. Yeah, but then once I actually went to sea, I realized that there is something much deeper. You're given responsibility very early. You grow very fast. When I compared myself with my friends in college who were still doing their bachelor's, finishing their master's, I was so different from them. People, cargo, safety, you learn very quickly. And that's what ocean teaches you. That environment shapes you. It makes you disciplined, humble, comfortable making decisions. You know, as a 22, 21-year-old merchant officer, you make big decisions. So I think that was one of the reasons why I ended up in shipping. As a child also, I loved exploring. I was born in a mountain state. We had no ships, we had no sea. To be honest, in my entire family, nobody has ever seen a ship. So I'm the only one who came out and did it. But I was always very, very curious about the next hill, the next city, the next country. And this was the one opportunity to get out of India and explore the world.
That's really interesting because a similar thing for me. I didn't have a shipping background. I think I did see ships. I think my family went on vacation once up in Canada. We went to the Welland Canal. We saw a ship, but that wasn't what changed it. I went onto the campus. I went to SUNY Maritime in the Bronx and went on, saw the ship, the training ship. We had a training ship. It was a little different type of program. Then they were similar to you. It was like financial independence. It was okay, 100% job placement. You don't have to worry about that. You can go see the world. You can kind of do anything you want. Lots of jobs, lots of different places. You could do a lot of cool things. The school's here. You could go into the military from it if you want. It was just this kind of avenue to really do something different. I grew up in New York City, but then we moved into I don't want to say into the mountains, but it was about 100 kilometers north of New York. So certainly the closest body of water was the Hudson River. And at that point, you don't see a lot of ships, maybe tugs and barges, but it was a very similar type thing. And I think that financial mobility is really what attracts a lot of people to shipping if they're not already in shipping from a family point of view, for sure.
I totally agree.
One of the things that happens to a lot of people is, you kind of run your path working at sea. For me, I had a designated idea like, okay, I'll do this for a little while. And I was on Jones Act tankers, Texas to Florida. It was a little bit different than, let's say, loading at an SBM in one place and discharge, or loading at a terminal and sailing for 15, 20 days. Our longest period at sea was 2.5 days, right? So how did you make that leap? And what was some of the things that you thought about coming ashore?
Right. First of all, let me tell you that there is a struggle for people to move ashore. When you're on the ship, that becomes your identity. It becomes your own kingdom. Especially once you take command, it's never easy to walk away from it. So, how did it happen with me? I'll tell you. And why did it happen to me? Then we can discuss. So, how did that happen? Was I was working with Ferguson Worldwide, BW vessels, and I was very, very lucky to have some of the senior leaders visit on board. They saw me, they saw how curious I was and how ambitious I was to grow. And I was given an opportunity to come ashore and join the office, which I really wanted to, right? But something to remember, when you step ashore, you become a cadet again. You start all over again. The learning curve is extremely steep. On the ship, there's only one master, one chief engineer. In the office, there are many masters and many chief engineers. And most of them more experienced than you because they came ashore earlier than you. So you have to absorb fast, adapt fast. You have to prove yourself all over again. And this is all to be done in a different arena. So, yes, coming ashore is a struggle. But then why would you do that? That's the question, right? With most of the people now. I think most of the masters, chief engineers on board vessels always think, what is next? Right? Because if you want to be more impactful, then you'll have to come ashore because you can only command one ship at one time and you can make a difference there. But once you are ashore, you have the capability to affect the entire fleet and understand many, many more things because, it's corporate. It's so much more that happens beyond the bridge.
Right. Right. Exactly.
But at the same time, I have to be very, very sure to what I say because, to be honest, moving ashore is a choice, not a necessity.
Mm.
I've got friends, outstanding professionals who continue to sail. They're happy with what they're doing. Means every time you go on a ship, you bring in discipline, you run it in your way, and you do your best. So, and we'll have to understand that opportunities at shore are limited. The competition is intense and the transition is not at all easy. You have to move, your family has to move, you have to start, as I said, all over again, and there is no guarantee that you're going to succeed. So, yeah. But if you're ready for the challenge, the journey from the bridge to the boardroom, I would say that you should definitely make that rewarding transformation in your career. It's how many.
Yeah, I
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't think there's many of my classmates who are still sailing. I think it's a handful. Also, we're getting a lot of people who are still sailing are probably close to retirement anyway. But I do think that's an interesting thing. For me, I got lucky in that when I came ashore for Mobil Oil, and they're like, okay, I came ashore, and what happened is they originally the other part is looking at like a pay cut, actually, at least in the U.S. at the time.
Yeah.
And what happened was, this is a funny story. Woman that ran the U.S. flag department when I was transitioning out to a different division, just not really to do with shipping. And they looked at it and they said, okay, we're going to start Chris at salary X because that's his starting salary as a seafarer.
Right.
And she goes, no, that's not his salary. I said, what do you mean? No, look at his overtime. And she basically managed to double my salary on a phone call. So, and I think she passed away years ago. So thank you, Peggy, for that. Because that is one of the transitions that a lot of people find difficult is not having the same level of pay. Although from what I can tell, that's changing a little bit because especially as there are more shipping companies or more companies that need seafarer expertise, whether it's what you're doing now in class societies, whether it's technology and other startups, I think the demand is bringing that level of salary up. You kind of transition ashore for a ship owner, now class society. Talk a little bit about some of the similarities because you talk about making an impact. And I think that was a great point. When you're on a ship, you make an impact for that ship. When you're working for a ship owner, you make an impact for, let's say, a group of ships that are in your responsibility. And now you're working for a class society, which is beyond that. Talk a little bit about some of those differences and kind of how that looks for you and for other people as well.
Yeah, so I'll connect this to my just now what we discussed, right? When you leave the sea, and exactly like what you said, it's about scaling up the impact because the maximum learning happens at sea. And I was talking to my niece and nephew recently, And I told them, whatever you do between 20 to 30 is 3x, 30 to 40 is 2x, after 40 is 1x. That's how it works. You know how much effort you put, that's how it multiplies. So, and when you're in your younger days, when you're sailing, whatever you learn at sea is the best learning you have. And when you get that ashore, right? Now, coming to your question, the, you know, from owner side and from a class society, it's the same, so let me wear the owner hat first, right? The priorities are very simple. Your vessel must be compliant and it should earn freight, TCE, right? Because you have put tens of millions of dollars into that vessel, and now you want that vessel to make money for you. Whether it's an asset play or it's a long-term operating strategy, every day the ship is not trading is lost money. Now, when you come to the class society, this is exactly what you do for the owners. You help them to achieve this. Your ship should be safe, your ship should be compliant, and your vessel should make money, right? Because we don't want you to be off-hired. We want your vessels to run. And this is exactly owner, TCE, class society. We make sure that that ship runs all the time and there is nothing that happens so that it's off-hired. So I think that's one of the things. What has not changed is the mindset, but what has changed in my understanding is that how powerful the ship design is. Because it's very important to talk about this, because when the ships are designed, the involvement of the seafarers is so limited, right? People who have sailed on the ship, people who handle those operations daily, right? Loading, discharging, running at sea, and their inputs are so important. And now this is the advantage I have, because 16 years at sea, 7, 8 years in operations in technical with the ship owner. Now I get all that expertise to the class society and I say, hey, let's not only talk about structure or let's talk about the rules, but also talk about non-class items. Let's talk about operational excellence. Let's talk about those small things that can be done on board to make the operations more efficient and seafarers' life easy.
Right. And that brings me to my next question. And obviously, the tongue in cheek name of the podcast is The Last Dinosaurs. I'd love to talk to you about technology with your experience of coming up on it sounds like about a quarter of a century. Talk a little bit about that evolution, how the evolution looks today from where you sit in the class society on technology. How does technology make seafarers' role a little bit easier, your old role as a superintendent easier? But first, talk a little bit about some of the evolution. I think that's kind of interesting, because let everybody know here, when I sailed, we didn't have electronic charts. So like this whole ECDIS thing is like, I've been on a ship, like, wow, okay, that's interesting. I still have old paper charts sitting in my garage somewhere that I used to practice on for my mates test. How you see technology maybe helping a little bit, and maybe some of the challenges of that as well.
Let's start with the paper charts going to ECDIS, right? Because I was sailing when that transition happened and I came ashore when ECDIS was already up and running. So definitely, like what you said, if you're a traditional, you go back to seafaring, right? We took so much pride in chart corrections and in maintaining our charts, right? I mean, for second officer, it was collar up, right? On board vessels. Now, maybe that feeling is lost when it's with ECDIS. But look at the advantage of it. It makes everything so fast, so much more easy. And then if you are digital friendly and you are somebody who doesn't mind changing from iPhone to Samsung or back, then you would easily be able to adapt to that. See, the biggest change today is that technology has finally moved from being theoretical to being operational. We are no longer talking about nice ideas on slides. We are talking about how this tool, that digital tool, and there's so many in the market, that actually influence how ships are designed, operated, and chartered. So let's talk a little bit more on it. When we evaluate a new solution today, when there's a solution in the market, the most important thing, what I always tell to my customers, to people in the industry, is verify, right? You need to always verify before you invest. There are more than 100 SaaS companies right now, maybe 1,000 even, right? There's a startup every now and then. And I'm not saying any of them are bad, but some may be more appropriate or better than the others. So, and shipping is too capital intensive, Chris. We know this, right? So you cannot gamble on trends. You cannot gamble on what is good in the market or what is being talked about or what is more on LinkedIn or less on LinkedIn. So energy modeling, I would hate to advertise on BV here, but energy modeling is the most important thing. You need to simulate. And now we do have these kind of softwares. In BV, we have something called a CCAT, Ship Energy Efficiency. modeling, where you could actually play around with 200 different inputs like vessel type, size, hull form, propulsion, fuels, trading routes, port stays, weather, chartering profile, regulatory exposure. You could put all those inputs on a computer, sit down, simulate the whole engine room, the whole ship on your computer and see what is the best technology for you, right? Because it's, yeah,
Sorry to interrupt, but that gets into the interesting thing of really starting to use things like digital twins, right?
exactly.
And and that gets kind of interesting. And again, it's okay to mention your job and wave the flag a little bit. Of course, that's part of the deal. We just don't expect it for 40 minutes, which you have not done, which is great. But I think it's at that innovation part, right? From innovation to adoption, and that's really where whether it's BV, whether it's even flag states, whether it's the combination of those, that's really important. And looking at things like potentially, which what you're describing to me seems like a digital twin for sure.
Exactly. And innovation is great, but adoption is everything, the operational validation. And that's exactly what I'm coming to. And digital twin is a classic example. Adoption only happens when you involve the people who are actually running it, who are at sea today. And that's how I think we would talk about the talent and the future workforce, how important it is for more and more seafarers to get that knowledge from sea ashore. Because then only these tools will make sense and they will be designed in the right manner for the seafarer, for the ship, or for the office, for the superintendents or managers. So the best solutions come when you bring together technology, class, owners, and people. That's what I say. Right. So yeah.
And I think this is now the kind of interesting because you've said this twice. Once in kind of this more adoption in kind of this when the ship is going, but you also said something interesting is in the vessel planning and building phase that getting input from the seafarers in that phase is also very important as well. Again, the design of the ship, where people are going to live and work is you need to have that input.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people over time have missed out on that, which is kind of interesting, especially given now that we're more connected.
Yeah, I mean, small things like, Chris, like the location of a stripping valve or manifolds, or, well, we are talking about a tank arrangements, those kind of things, these are not looked at they had nothing to do with the structure point of view. These all are involved in when you do a detailed review of the drawings, and which is not part of the classwork and it's not under the regulations, right? So, but definitely now the class societies and especially at Bureau Veritas, we make sure that we get into the depth and see that how can we make the vessel operationally more safer, easier to operate and optimized. Especially with the pressure of the decarbonization, you have to understand that operational excellence is the most low-lying fruit. It doesn't require a lot of investment, but it does require changes, behavioral changes. It requires operational changes, which will help us to, for the emission control, right, for the decarbonization.
Yeah, and that puts a lot of pressure on the seafarers, right, to make sure that they are operating the ship at peak efficiency because, and you bring up so rightfully, it impacts the TCE, right, the earnings of the ship. Because if you can make the ship more fuel efficient at the end of the day, that impacts the bottom line. I mean, there's no two ways around it. And it's that kind of link between operations and earnings that gets highlighted, especially now where everybody's paying attention despite recent IMO pausing. People are still paying attention to that because it's a bottom line number.
Exactly. And I'd like to bring one point here is that it is very important for the people on the vessel, the seafarers, to be fully involved in the decarbonization strategy because, at the end of the day, the fuel is burnt on the vessel and the emissions are happening on the ship. So they should be part of those discussions. And the companies, big companies, the big names in the market, they do that. They do involve during the seminars, during the meetings, they do involve, they have a lot of internships. They do have getting masters and chief engineers and second engineers, the chief officers to the office for 2 months, 3 months on projects. And this is exactly is the need of the hour because they need to be involved with digitalization and decarbonization. But these words are spoken less time in the whole year. Every event, every panel talks about it, but nobody says that, yes, the seafarers on board need to be involved in this, which I feel is very, very important.
Yeah, and you're right in that. When we talk about these initiatives, we generally especially when it comes into the press, you see a lot of discussion from the bigger companies. Right now, I know your purview is the tanker side, but you typically see the bigger companies like Maersk, CMA, CGM, and on the tanker side, maybe you see like a Maersk Tankers, and
Yeah.
they've been involved in decarbonization. So I think that that's really interesting. Read somewhere the average fleet size for a ship owner is like 5 ships, right? So the average ship owner, who are your clients as well. Obviously you have the big, clients that have dozens, if not maybe 100 ships under, with your class society. But then you probably have a handful of companies where, you got 2, 3 ships, and that's half their fleet, right? And they maybe have 2, 3 class with somebody else. Talk a little bit about going into those companies where on the one hand, they operate mean and lean, right? And maybe you have an initiative with your class state. They have to operate mean and lean because they don't have a big, underlying operations. But at the same time, they can't ignore these regulations because one, they're regulations, and two, every dollar that they're able to save is actually more impactful than, let's say, a dollar saved by a company that has 50 ships, right? It's a different scale from the overall business strategy. Do you see any differences in that? I'd love to hear your view.
Yeah, means there are two, three things there. First is that as a class society, I feel that the smaller owners with 5 ships, 3 ships, 6 ships, 5 ships, definitely need more involvement of ours in their decarbonization strategy because they don't have the resources to plan that by themselves, right? That is the first thing. But normally, if it's a smaller owner, he would also wait, or they would also wait for the big boys to take action first, and then to follow, right? So, and that's the reason when you see it in trade winds and you see it everywhere, the big boys take action. They go with dual fuel or some technology, and then others will follow. But having said that, for owners with even 5 or 6 ships, you still need a fleet level decarbonization strategy. Means, you can't ignore it, as you said it. And the best part is that the way the IMO regulations are coming, right? And I've actually discussed this with the General Secretary himself, with the Secretary General himself. And you don't have to make every vessel perfect. You might run one ship with a much lower GFI and have another ship with a much higher GFI because at the end of the day, it's your average, right? So, and this kind of optimization is not possible without data, without modeling. Again, coming back, we've got a tool called OptiCarbon where we could play around and say, okay, I've got 5 ships and this is what I can do in coming 3, 6 months, 12 months, or 3 years or 5 years. And this would be the resultant. And at a click of a second, we know what would be the result. And then I could say, okay, this should be my decarbonization strategy for my vessel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One runs on biofuel, one I do nothing, other one I'm gonna go for paints and blah blah blah. So much.
If you look at it, you kind of have to take that approach. And that's where, things like pooling gets
Exactly.
into some very interesting conversations, I'm sure. I worked for a ship owner that had pools, and this was before, Fuel EU or EU
Mhm.
ETS with the pooling. And, it was always a discussion about what ships perform better. And, you get to arguments over sister ships. Those were kind of interesting. Anyway, those are interesting discussions. I go back to the days of people running off the ships and looking for a payphone to call home is connectivity, right? I think the only phone call I ever made on a ship was when I was a cadet and I just turned 19, and the captain let me call home on a satellite phone because it was my birthday, but it was like $10 an hour. He's like, make it quick. And I was like, okay. Saying that, activity, huge part of the discussion, right? Whether it's just for mental health or for other things. I'd love to hear your view, especially when it comes to and kind of where your expertise lies, and that's on the vetting side and getting updates and kind of you know i- improving the ship's efficiency. Talk a little bit about that because you're more connected, you have more ability to adjust and to make improvements. But I'd love to hear your view, especially from the vetting and operational efficiency, looking at it from seafarers, from your owning side, and now from class side. I'd love to hear kind of what you think about connectivity.
Yeah. So first, connectivity is great, right? I just wish that I would have started my career. I would have been on board when there was such great connectivity available, right? There's nothing wrong with it. Hear a lot of things, especially when you're at these events or industrial collaborations, that people don't come to the smoke room. They sit in their room, they're watching movie, or they're always on WhatsApp, or they're talking to their girlfriend, wife, whatever, parents. Nothing wrong with it. That's what we do, right? We have our phones working. Just imagine one day if I take away your phone. I think
That's great. That's a great point. And I had a guest on earlier, and we were talking about that. Like, okay, well, if you're going to limit that, then tell everybody when they go to the office, they have to check their phones at the door.
yeah,
Or
exactly.
you work even before you work from home. You have to put your phone off.
Yeah, so Chris, we started something at our home, before I get into the vetting part of it. And sorry, I'm sharing something very personal. At home on every Sunday, the iPhone has this feature. It tells you the average hours you have used it every day, right? And it appears on
Oh,
your
I don't want to see that for me.
So me and my wife have this challenge between us that how can we get that reduced, and we should not be spending too much time on the phone, but it's still about 2 to 3 hours every day because you're using it for emails, for Teams, for your work, for your personal, for everything. So why put exception for seafarers and for the ship and say, hey, why should we have phone? People don't socialize. While we on ashore, while we are ashore, we are socializing with our phones on, then why can't they socialize? It's just being normal. It is a normal
Exactly.
way of living. Now going to the wedding, means that's a very sensitive topic. So let's move on.
No, I think it's a good one, and it brings up things like mental health and all
Exactly.
these other avenues which I've talked about before, and people who have to deal with issues at home, but they're 3,000 miles away.
Exactly.
Certainly, those are issues that, again, how much do you you try to control it, or do you just say, "Hey, listen, this is life," and whether you're 3,000 miles away or 10 miles away, sometimes it comes at you, right? And I think the only thing I could say to that is I had somebody on, I think it was from D'Amico, and he said, "We also try to engage the families on what goes on with them because of that distance," right? It is a different beast than being able to see somebody in an hour, right, and kind of resolve it. It's a different problem, but it can be solved for sure.
Exactly. And I think it's very important. It's very important for companies to have that feedback on both the sides, And big companies, again, they are doing this. The crewing side is much more sensitive now. My last company, Hafnia, and I can very proudly say that they took really good care of the seafarers and they made sure that the families are as involved and everybody there is fully part of the ship, and they know what's happening. If anything goes wrong, also they make sure that each and every person who's involved with that seafarer is fully informed and transparent. And yeah, that's how it should be.
Yeah, I had somebody out from Hafnia about a year and a half ago, and he was saying the exact same thing, and you could really hear the passion and care
Exactly.
that was being put forth, and hopefully is an example for others, not only just in tankers, but all aspects of shipping. But
Any ship,
pivoting to shipping, pivoting to vetting and kind of inspections, can connectivity help with that? And kind of without cutting corners, but making that process, because especially on the tanker side, vetting takes up so much time and it goes beyond port state control. You could have obviously SIRE inspection or CDI inspections that really take up a lot of time in port. Can there be an evolution where some of the stuff is done ahead of time? Maybe to help with class or flag, and really kind of, make it more efficient without losing any, let's say, without cutting corners.
Yeah. So, Chris, shipping is an industry where standards matter, right? And that's why vetting and inspection will always be critical. It is extremely important to protect people, cargo, environment, right? And I believe that digital tools don't replace that. They strengthen it. They are helping, again, the office and the sea staff to prepare, to identify risk earlier and avoid surprises. So I don't see there is no question of cutting corners. In fact, a good digitalization makes compliance and inspection more robust, and that's what I've seen. And these digital tools are fantastic. Means I could give you some examples more than only talking about vetting or inspections. Let's talk about smart ship systems. Let's talk about predictive maintenance, right? By monitoring engines, pumps, key equipment, you could detect problems much before they became failures at sea. right? And during our time, when I was sailing, we didn't have these kind of things, and there were surprises, there were failures, there were a lot of failures, right? So, and then you look at the voyage optimization tools right now. They're so good. They have advanced to a different level. We're talking about electronic bills of lading, blockchain technology. I don't know if you're aware. There's a new concept recently very popular getting into by tokenization of ships. Now, I'm going a little bit away from betting, but
Yeah, no, it's yeah, that's been around for a little while. I know a
yeah,
few people have started and stopped, and I know people are really trying to get into it. I had a call about it before the holidays as well. Interesting. Let's see what happens.
yeah. And then I can tell you about another fantastic digital tool that I've seen recently. It's called SteelCore. You can manage corrosion. You could be very reactive into something, turn that reactive maintenance to something measurable and manageable. So I think predictive maintenance is a classic example. Digitalization is required. There's nothing wrong with it. You have to also understand that without connectivity, none of these things would work. We need that, right? And if used correctly, and coming back to the basic, the EGDIS, if used correctly, it's a fantastic tool. And nothing can go wrong because you have everything right there on your screen, right? But the question here is used correctly, training. And that's what it comes down to. The seafaring is changing from sextant. Now you're coming to digitalization.
Yeah.
Though I still feel sextant was so good, but we need to come up from it and say if each of the seafarers, we also as shore staff, we all should be trained regularly, and we should make sure that we get better at AI, get better at blockchain, get better at digitalization. We have to move with the flow. You can't say that shipping would lag behind, everything else will move forward.
Again, going back to the name of the podcast and to see how we're moving forward in an industry that is generally considered rooted in its past. And again, rightfully so, because, something like standards don't change. Standards will, or if they do, it takes a monumental effort to do so, right? These are, and they're things because of safety, whether it's for safety of the ship, human life, cargo, safety of the environment is all generally well, I would say not generally, it is the reason for a lot of the standards. You bring this up a couple of times. You said you come from a mountain town and you have 8,000 people who have gone to sea there. If you go back to that mountain town and you talk to school children or what have you, or maybe a little bit older and thinking about what university or career path they should start off with, what would you tell them about seafaring and why it could be a good choice for them?
Chris, I'm very passionate about this topic. I wish I have a little more time. I think I can talk for 2, 3 minutes. So shipping, has always struggled to attract talent. Always. Not because the work is not meaningful, but because the perception has been wrong. And especially, I could tell you this from my background. The story is simple, but it's very negative when it goes back to the younger generation, somebody who might be in school or college and is thinking of becoming a merchant officer, right? The perception is you're away from home for months without connection. You're isolated. You don't have much of legal or social protection. It's a tough life and many more. There's some I would not even like to say here. So those perceptions are the ones which are very, very deep rooted. The reason is that nobody has ever explained the real value of the profession. People have talked about money at a young age. We spoke about it when we started this podcast. But no one talks about what does it mean to become a master or a chief engineer on board when you are sole responsible for millions and millions of dollars. That is the real responsibility. And trust me, it is more than the boardroom. But nobody explains that. Yes, this is true. Life at sea is not easy, and it teaches you something very, very powerful: how to manage. The word manage is so important here. Something that I can never forget, Chris, from my cadetship is when you are on board vessel and something very humble, you learn not how much you need, but how little you need to function well. And this is exactly shipping is all about. So I would say that we need to change that perception to attract the younger generation. They need to know that shipping is not only about sailing, it's a much, much more. There are so many CEOs I know, I can name so many of them, who started their career as deck boys or cook boys or even ordinary seamen or cadets, and they're all sitting as CEOs in some company today. So, including me, we all have done well. So, I'm sure there's a path, but nobody explains that path. So, It's more about awareness, and that's where it comes to, right? I've been working very closely with academy here in Dubai. It's called Sharjah Maritime Academy, much newer college, and I see the optimism that they are putting into the cadets. They are explaining how global this career is. They don't say it's only about shipping. It is about oil, gas, commodities. It's about energy. It's about the
Right.
real need of the world. So
Right.
let's not only talk about the early money, but let's talk about what it makes you as a person. Solid.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing, and I know my school, SUNY Maritime, the current president, who also is a graduate, but he went into the Navy, and he calls, because of where the school is, it's actually on like a peninsula. He calls it the Peninsula of Opportunity, right? He doesn't say it's a shipping school, but it's like an opportunity. I think that's a really apropos way of putting shipping wherever you go, whether it's one of the schools here in the U.S., whether it's
Yeah,
one of the maritime academies, whether it's the Caribbean one, the one obviously in Dubai or other place, India, Philippines. There's a level of opportunity that you have in the industry. And I go back to, depending on who you ask, it's either 80 or 90% of everything moves on ships, right? And that fact, despite technology, despite everything else, unless at some point we can, with our minds, manifest goods, we're going to have to move stuff, right? Whether it's oil for the refineries, and people are like, well, we need less oil. Well, fine, we're going to have to move other things that are going to build the wind farms or build even the nuclear or more efficient
absolutely,
power plants.
absolutely,
It's all gonna come down
absolutely,
to that.
absolutely.
And I agree 100%.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
Chris,
yeah,
what
absolutely.
surprises me? Women in maritime. Now, this topic has really come up well in last 4 5 years, right? And there are big companies which have pledged 50% of their staff and C would be women, right? But now the point here is, I don't know why it was missed. We were missing half of the pool out there, the talent pool. And now it's so good to see that it is not a men's profession anymore.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's some fantastic development on this. And hats off to each company who's doing that. And hats off to the seafarers. They have done a fantastic job.
I know there's been more of a push to go into, back to the office, but I do think that there's going to be a continued view of remote workers, especially in shipping. And that's going to open up a whole separate talent pool of people, maybe who weren't seafarers, but maybe who have a passion for shipping. And that could diversify from a lot of different point of view, people who are involved in shipping. And I'm not just talking about women versus men versus white versus brown versus black versus Asian. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about somebody who lives, let's say, where you grew up, doesn't really want to go to sea, but likes shipping, can do certain things, whether it's client services on an IT company or for other companies. There's all sorts of things that you could do and still be involved. And remote work opens up that diversity. Again, I also look at diversity of thought, right? Which is something that
Oh,
is always important. I always tell people, when you, especially on the startup side, yes, you should have people who understand how to use technology and leverage blockchain or AI and that sort of stuff. Let's not go overboard and not have anybody in shipping. Now, on the other end, if you have a technology company, you shouldn't have, and it's 15 people, you shouldn't have 15 seafarers, right? Let's be smart about this and get a
absolutely.
diversity of thought. And that's what I think, opening up the industry to a broader view is going to actually help, right? And I think that that's where it could be really interesting. As we close out, we started the chat a little bit talking about the struggles of all parents, and that is sick kids and having children. The two of us do. I know we get busy, but you do travel. I met you in Tampa, actually, based in Dubai. When you're traveling or when you have a downtime there, what books are you reading? Are you reading anything interesting? And it could be fiction. It could be like, oh no, I read, sci-fi and or crime thrillers or something like that. It doesn't have to be I'm reading a management book. It could be something more lighthearted.
Yeah, but Chris, the truth is that I end up reading mostly on technology. Gift, I read a lot. I spend 2 hours every day just reading trade winds. So you could imagine that a lot of my time goes into shipping. Yes, beside that, what I'm reading right now is How to Raise a Secure Child. I don't know if you have heard of this book. We all try to be a perfect parent, and I do understand that I travel a lot, more than 50% of my time. So I do take support of these books to see what I can do better for my children. As you said, we started talking about it. So, and how can we nurture them better, protect them better in this fast changing world with so much of exposure. So yeah, that's what I'm doing, right? Raising a secure child. But otherwise, to be honest, I don't read much of the novels as such. I end up reading mostly on technology a lot, and that takes most of my time.
Yeah, I hear that. I know a lot of people get very much into it. I've read a few interesting things recently, but that book sounds like a good one for parents, especially in this day and age. Captain Arora, this was a fantastic chat. Thank you for bringing on your perspective and evolution personally and professionally. And I think it's great. And thank you for being one of the first people, the first person on from a class society. So I appreciate that. I think we're going to have a little bit more of that this year. So I'm excited for that because class societies are such a huge part of where the rubber hits the road, actually. So it's very important to have that. So thank you for coming on the podcast, and I do appreciate it.
No, thank you very much, Chris. The first time we met, you saw my picture on a big screen with a very dirty boiler suit, grease all over. That was my first shift where I was punished to clean the engine room bilges. And I'm still the
Yeah,
same
yeah, yeah.
person. I'm still the same person, just my clothes have changed. I'm still a seafarer at heart, and I still miss sailing. And I'm always back to that cadet standing with grease all over and oil all over me. And I love
Yeah, I have one of those pictures too. I had a lot more hair. It was a few pounds lighter. Anyway, great
All
to
right.
chat with you. Thank you so much for coming on, and take care, and I'm sure we'll see you around.
Right, Chris.